An abandoned insane asylum harboring the maniacal spirits of its former patients, a prestigious college whose campus is absolutely saturated in ghost stories and local lore, and a terrifying old prison boasting some of the more dangerous paranormal activity in the country await on this journey through some of the most haunted places in West Virginia. Let's jump right in. Our first haunt takes us to West Virginia's eastern panhandle and on a tour through the iconic Berkeley Springs Castle. Berkeley Springs Castle, or the Samuel Taylor Sweet Cottage, which is located in none other than Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, is a fortress-like construct that's grown into one of the region's most peculiar and popular icons, one that totes an eerie array of purported supernatural activity. Historically, through the mid-1800s, lands now holding the town of Berkeley Springs, and for that matter, our prestigious castle in question, would grow in popularity as wealthy travelers made their way to the area's natural mineral springs, which were believed to tote healing properties. Incidentally, among those drawn in was one Colonel Samuel Taylor Sweet, a wealthy businessman and political figure who, upon arriving to the locale, fell in love with the springs and their surroundings. In 1885, Samuel would begin construction on a grand estate inspired by the castles of medieval Europe. Unfortunately, however, the colonel would end up passing on in 1888 before his creation was ever even completed, and by the time it was fully finished, through the early 1890s, his widow, Rosa Pelham Sweet, and their 3 children would move in. Upon inheriting her husband's fortune and upon moving into the castle, Rosa would entertain luxurious parties on a consistent basis, and it's said that her spending during this time was unrestrained. In around just 1 decade, Rosa managed to blow through a ridiculous amount of money, and in 1916, after creditors literally forced her out of the castle, she had no choice but to sell the property to the local bank. Following its sale, the prestigious abode would serve a variety of purposes and would act as a boys' camp, as a retreat, and as a museum. And as time went on, interest in the site was slowly restored. More recently, in 1980, the castle would be added to the National Register of Historic Places. In 2002, it would be purchased by one Andrew Goslin, who would lovingly restore as much of the property as he could. And since, the old estate has been acquired by the Berkeley Castle Foundation. In the present, the castle is opened on a pretty regular basis, with the foundation offering all manner of tours and a wide array of events that take visitors through the impressive construct, including several paranormally themed events and even options for murder mysteries played out within the castle. But it's not all fun and games at the Samuel Taylor Sweet Cottage, and over its lengthy existence, a number of reports of inexplicable happenings have surfaced from within, with both staff and guests reporting instances of doors opening and closing on their own, extreme cold spots felt in temperature-controlled rooms, and documentation from early morning staff who have arrived to find displays or furniture completely rearranged overnight, despite every door and window being securely locked. One of the most famous apparitions sighted across castle grounds is believed to be that of old Colonel Sam himself, who's been known to appear in formal attire, a serious look upon his face as he seemingly marvels over the construct he never lived to see finished. Though the colonel's ghost has been known to startle the unsuspecting, at the end of the day, he's considered to be completely harmless, and most describe him as seemingly too preoccupied with the castle to pay the living any bother. Multiple paranormal investigations of the castle have yielded high EMF levels, EVPs of both children's voices as well as of the commotion of parties lost to time, and hits on communicative devices such as spirit boxes, and several have told of feeling sudden rushes of wind when the estate is completely sealed up. Lastly, easily the most famous ghost on site is said to be that of Rosa. You see, long before the castle ever stood, in 1876, after years of amassing a fortune in distilling, investment, and politics, Colonel Taylor experienced what he documented as the worst year of his life. His stocks turned sour, his DC mansion was destroyed in a fire, and he would go through a brutal divorce. Amongst this chaos, however, the colonel ended up meeting Rosa Pelham, who, at only 17 years of age, was over 40 years his younger. But age didn't matter. The Colonel was smitten, and Rosa was smitten with him. It was love at first sight, and shortly after their meeting, the Colonel would propose to the young girl, to which she would reject his proposal on account of the age difference alone. Yet there was something about Sweet that stuck with Rosa. Then 5 years later, by chance, the two would meet again in Berkeley Springs and would spend time in each other's company. After mentioning that she'd always loved castles, the smooth-talking Samuel Sweet would propose once again and would promise to build her a castle on the grounds that she accept this proposal, to which, this time, Rosa would agree, and the couple would be married just 3 days later. Now, contrary to the image this definitely conjures, this oddly matched couple was said to be very much in love and very happy, and the spirit of Rosa has been sighted across castle grounds multiple times. Some say, as she awaits the return of her husband in the lavish house he constructed just for her. Rosa's ghost has been sighted both lounging on furniture and also working in the kitchen and gardens, and is often described as being clad in black or dark gray garments, a content and patient look upon her face. Our second haunt takes us to the southern border of West Virginia and has us exploring the overgrown grounds of the Lake Shawnee Amusement Park. The Lake Shawnee Amusement Park, which is located just outside of the town of Rock, West Virginia, is an abandoned entertainment venue toting a series of weathered and overgrown rides that inspire chills with a single glance, whose bounds have become popular amongst dark tourists and paranormal investigators alike, and that are purported to harbor a number of terrifying hauntings that span back to well before the park was ever even a pipe dream. Historically, predating European settlement, lands now holding the theme park were, in fact, inhabited by the Shawnee for thousands of years, and their people thrived off of the lake's lush environment and plentiful food sources. Disturbingly, the exact ground the amusement park was built atop is believed to have been a Shawnee burial ground, and to make matters worse in the haunted department, it was also the site of a brutal tragedy. In 1783, landowner Mitchell Clay and his family were attacked by local tribal warriors, resulting in the scalping and execution of his 16-year-old daughter and 18-year-old son, and in the burning at the stake of his younger son, who was also just 16. While some tell it that Clay went on a vengeance ride and killed those responsible for the slayings, others claim he struck a deal with the tribe in order to give his children proper burials. Whatever the case, the incident left a lasting stain on the land, and shortly thereafter, those who lived near began speaking of strange happenings resulting from the trauma. Eras would come and go, until finally in 1926, interest in the site was revived when entrepreneur Conley Triggs Snidow Sr. purchased the property, and set to work on the designing of an amusement park suited for the people of Mercer County. Once complete, this park would feature a Ferris wheel, a swing ride, and other attractions, and it would namely cater to coal miners and their families. Eventually, the site would also implement a swimming pool, a racetrack, concession stands, a dance hall, and even cabins for overnight stays. And it would quickly evolve into a center for the community. Unfortunately, however, over its years of operation, the park experienced several severe tragedies. Through Snidow's ownership, 2 drowning deaths would transpire, and in 1966, a girl was killed on the swing ride when a delivery truck backed into it. Finally, in 1967, the park was forced to close its gates following a failed health inspection. But Lake Shawnee's story didn't end there. After lying abandoned for just shy of 2 decades, in 1985, former park employee Gaylord White would purchase the old site and would reopen the park through the summer of 1987. White's dreams were ultimately short-lived, however, as the very next year, insurance rates would rise drastically and he would be forced to close the park once more. Following this second closure, Lake Shawnee was used for a number of purposes, including in fishing tournaments, in off-road motorsports, and in other endeavors targeted at turning whatever profit they could manage. Disturbingly, through the early 1990s, one of White's crews would uncover numerous Native American artifacts and remains across the area, after which archaeologists from Marshall University would spend several years uncovering graves and additional artifacts, alongside no less than 13 skeletons. Not surprisingly, this caused a massive surge in visitors wanting to experience White's haunted, abandoned amusement park firsthand, and he wasn't about to let this opportunity slip by. Following its growing infamy and subsequent social media booms, White would begin hosting Halloween events and guided tours of the old park. Today, the Lake Shawnee Amusement Park remains open, albeit by appointment or tour only, and each year, countless visitors travel from far and wide in hopes of catching some of its infamous supernatural activity at one of its many varied events. And to be fair, most don't leave disappointed, with those braving the park's bounds detailing the eerie sounds of rides and the ebb and flow of a crowd that's no longer there. Instances of personal electronics dying even on full charges, and random bouts of severe vertigo that only dissipate once whoever is experiencing them leaves the property. One of the most commonly encountered apparitions at Lake Shawnee is none other than that of the little girl who died on the swings to the delivery truck. Eerily, she has been known to manifest all over the area, with unsuspecting visitors thinking her an actual living little girl who is simply lost, before turning for a split second to find that she's vanished. Notably, the original swing set that she died on was acquired by White when he purchased the park, and the little girl's swing is marked with a red ribbon. It's believed her spirit is tied to this attraction, and some stories tell that she likes to move the owl ornament on the adjacent seat on particularly calm and windless nights. Another commonly encountered spirit at the park is that of one of the children who drowned in the lake, being a little boy from what witnesses can tell. Now, while on a handful of occasions those who have encountered him have actually seen his small form in the distance, or heard his little giggles from darkened spaces, most often this entity isn't actually sighted, but rather visitors hear the small pitter-patter of feet from out of sight, and later investigate to find tiny, wet footprints on the ground. Our third haunt takes us to the north-central border of the state and has us undergoing orientation at the prestigious West Virginia University. West Virginia University, or WVU, whose main campus is placed in Morgantown, is a massive 1,900-acre public land-grant research institution that boasts a school population of over 30,000 students, and its many weathered buildings, according to campus lore, harbor a range of ghostly hauntings tied to the region's past. Historically, under the Morrill Land-Grant Colleges Act in 1862, in 1867, West Virginia legislature would establish an agricultural college of West Virginia, which, only a year later, would be re-established as West Virginia University, and its early campus would be established from within the grounds of former academies that stretched back to the early 1800s. In 1870, the first campus building was completed in the form of University Hall, which would later be renamed as Martin Hall, and combined with the 1876 creation of the University Building and the 1893 addition of Chitwood Hall would form a precursor to our modern Woodburn Circle. Over the years, additional buildings in the area were either acquired or constructed under the growing university, and through the turn of the 20th century, the school would construct its first library in what is now Stewart Hall. Impressively, in 1911, U.S. President William Howard Taft would pay the school a visit for a school presidential inauguration. Following women's efforts through World War I, the school would officialize women's dorms on site, and through the 1920s, WVU's classic Mountaineer mascot was adopted, and Mountaineer Field was completed. Unfortunately, school populace would take a dive through the 1940s as many potential male students left for World War II, and in their absence, female student numbers actually surpassed male numbers for the first time in 1943. Following the war, and beginning in the mid to late 1950s, the university would experience its most significant era of growth to date, and by the 1970s, the school would implement an automated transit system to lessen traffic and congestion. Through the remainder of the 70s, the school would continue to boom until the population reached over 22,000. Through the 1980s, WVU would earn a reputation as a massive party school, and through the 1990s, the school would combat its outrageous party reputation by constructing a host of venues that provided safe, albeit more adult entertainment, events, or activities. More recently, through the early 2000s, the school's populace would reach record numbers, all the while its football and baseball teams earned a number of recognitions. However, things would take a turn in 2008, when it was revealed that WVU had improperly granted an MBA to one Heather Bresch, daughter of State Governor Joe Manchin, who was also an employee of Mylan Pharmaceuticals, which was one of the university's largest donors. Following this revelation, the blowback, as you can imagine, was pretty massive, and resulted in the resignation of the acting school president, a provost, and of the business school's dean. Subsequently, in 2023, under financial strain, the school threatened to cut 7% of their faculty as what were deemed budget cuts, to which a massive student union staged a walkout that was highly publicized. Despite these setbacks, WVU is still recognized as a highly esteemed institution, though its history of wild parties, late nights, and political scandals have created an ambiance that some might describe as murky around the edges. Not surprisingly, the whole of the WVU campus is absolutely saturated in ghost tales and urban legends, and many a local get-together or party is still graced by traditions that stretch back to the school's very founding, being the telling of scary stories. One of the most popular of these stories centers around the mountain layer and Stewart Hall, where some have told of being taunted by a spectral little girl in a yellow dress that's since been dubbed Sally. In Elizabeth Moore Hall, the spirit of its namesake being Elizabeth Moore has been cited keeping an eye over the space and its students. In Borman Hall, reports include noises and the clatter of furniture emanating from a fourth floor that simply doesn't exist. And the downtown library is said to be roamed by the entity of an old janitor who fell down an elevator shaft to his death in the building's earlier days. Additionally, also reported from this library are encounters with a ghostly cat that many call Sheba, who's believed to be the apparition of former librarian Eliza Skinner's loyal feline companion, and who is often seen sitting amongst the shelves, observing those who pass below. A final campus location of particular paranormal intrigue is that of Woodburn Hall, where students and staff have reported an array of ghostly phenomena, including phantom footsteps heard from empty spaces, instances in which startled students witness figures dart suddenly across rooms that they thought they were alone in, and accounts of disembodied voices calling out names from the past. On top of all of this, Woodburn, which was constructed circa 1875 to 1876, is also home to one of the campus's oldest legends. As this legend goes, sometime after the hall's construction, students thought it would be a funny prank to lead a cow up to the top of its tower. Unfortunately, responders were ultimately unable to get this cow to, come back down, and the incident resulted in the cow's death. To this day, especially on foggy nights, it's said the panicked mooing of the poor cow can still be heard from the tower, even when it's locked up and the area is completely empty. Our fourth haunt takes us to the heart of the state and has us braving the long and lonely hallways within the infamous Trans-Allegheny Asylum. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, which is located out of Weston, West Virginia, is a former insane asylum that operated for over a century, which was turned into an educational venue and popular historic landmark that's bound to welcome countless visitors each year, and that boasts some of the most terrifying ghost stories not just in the state, but in the country. Historically, following its approval under the Virginia General Assembly, a board of directors would settle on a parcel of land for the construction of a new mental institution, which, at the time, was located in Virginia, and after which, in 1858, construction of said asylum was started and would utilize building materials sourced locally, including blue sandstone from Mount Clair. Unfortunately, in 1861, the building process would be put on halt as the American Civil War ravaged the nation, and following Virginia's secession from the U.S., the government would demand that unused hospital build funds be returned. However, before this could happen, the 7th Ohio Volunteer Infantry would intercept said funds at the bank and would return them to Wheeling, where they would be set aside for what was being called the Restored Government of Virginia. And incidentally, they were eventually utilized as a startup treasury for what would soon become a new Union state. While construction would be attempted over following years, the war made things virtually impossible, and both Union and Confederate forces would occupy the site at different times, and would also each loot building supplies. Following the admission of West Virginia as a state in 1863, and the hospital falling within this new border, it was re-established as the West Virginia Hospital for the Insane. The asylum would begin admitting patients the following year. Now, guys, I'm sure we've all read about or seen those stereotypical shady mental institutions from the late 19th and early 20th century that are always featured in various horror books and movies. You know, the ones perfectly sane protagonists get locked up in for ridiculous reasons. Well, that was Trans-Allegheny in its earliest days. Like something straight out of Lovecraft, patients were admitted on site for things like asthma, laziness, egotism, strong menstrual emotions, and even greediness. And intake was so sharp the campus was quickly overcrowded and understaffed, resulting in horrible conditions. Through the turn of the century, things would only worsen as a space designed to hold only 250 patients would reach numbers as high as 2,600 at times. A 1938 report by a survey committee found the hospital housed epileptics, alcoholics, and drug addicts amongst its ranks, conditions which should have been treated with basic outpatient care. And in 1949, a series of reports by the Charleston Gazette cited poor conditions and insufficient furniture and lighting in patient wings, while staff portions of the building were filled with luxury. Sadly, over its many years, these poor conditions led to sickness, violence, and countless deaths. And to make matters worse, the 1950s would usher in the West Virginia Lobotomy Project, under one Walter Freeman, which aimed to use lobotomies as often as possible in order to reduce overcrowding. Now, this is particularly disturbing, as if you know what a lobotomy is, you know it often led to irreversible brain damage ranging up to people being completely unresponsive, and they were just serving these things up for reasons that today wouldn't even be considered mental disorders. It's just plain chilling. By the 1980s, plans for the construction of a modern mental institution had been announced. Through the 1990s, the William R. Sharp Jr. Hospital opened to patients. And in 1994, under court order, Trans-Allegheny would officially close its doors. For years, the site would sit abandoned and would fall into disrepair. For a time through the early 2000s, it would host a series of museums, and in 2007, the asylum was purchased by Joe Jordan, who would go on to perform a series of impressive renovations while maintaining the museums, hosting events, and offering both historic and paranormal tours. The Trans-Allegheny Asylum remains open to this day, and for those interested, I'd highly recommend checking out their event schedule. As this year alone, being 2026, it looks like they're doing tours, Easter egg hunts, car shows, haunted houses, and much, much more. Hauntings at the asylum are believed to be a result of its downright torturous past, and the whole of the site is believed to house literally countless spirits, with both staff and visitors reporting doors that open and close by themselves, shadowy figures sighted lurking down dark hallways, and disembodied laughter, moaning, and sobbing. One of the asylum's most famous apparitions is that of Lily, a little girl in late 19th century clothing who's been sighted darting between doorways or around corners, or more rarely, peering out from behind furniture or darkened rooms. As the story goes, right after the Civil War, a pregnant woman was admitted into the hospital, and her baby was born there and was cared for by staff. Sadly, this story goes on to tell that at only 9 years of age, Lily contracted pneumonia and passed on, and that following her death, staff members begin to report run-ins with her pint-sized spirit. One tradition for those who visit Lily's old room is to leave toys or small effects for her ghost to play with, and many who have participated in said ritual have reported watching in disbelief as the toys they've left behind move on their own before their very eyes. Another well-known apparition on asylum grounds is said to be either Jesse or James, a man who, in life, died of a heart attack in a bathtub, and whose specter has been known to appear to the living in a somewhat confused state. And also, the ghost of one Elizabeth, a mysterious female apparition who some suspect was a nurse, and who's been known to appear to those who have gotten themselves lost in order to lead them back to the exit. But the apparitions in Trans-Allegheny aren't all friendly. The ominous, maniacal forms of a couple of patients who put another patient's head under a bedpost and jumped on the bed, resulting in his death, have been known to manifest at random, cackling wildly and circling the living. While the most terrifying apparition on site is known as Slewfoot. As it's told, old Slewfoot is the violent ghost of a murderer who killed many patients in the upstairs bathroom, and to date, his spirit is believed to be confined to the upper floors, with local legend warning that you never want to cross paths with him. Saving the spookiest location for last, our fifth and final haunt takes us way up to the state's northern panhandle, and on a tour of the iconic old West Virginia Penitentiary. The old West Virginia Penitentiary, which is placed out of Moundsville in West Virginia, is a closed-down Gothic-style prison that operated for over a century. Its bounds have since been transformed into a popular tourist attraction, museum, training facility, and filming location, and that's acted as a catalyst for some of the scariest hauntings not just in the state or country, but in the world. Historically, following the aforementioned secession of West Virginia from Virginia in 1863, the newly formed state would require an array of public institutions including a new prison, and following an 1865 press review that harshly criticized the new government's lack of detention centers, in 1866, state legislature would approve the purchase of land in Moundsville for the creation of a penitentiary, which was rumored to be smack dab on top of a native burial ground. Following this approval, the state would set up a temporary wooden prison while they set to work on more permanent facilities. And after a short debate, it was decided that the new permanent pen would be constructed in a formidable Gothic Revival-style architecture. As far as construction went, prison labor was utilized through the first phase of construction, which would conclude in 1876. And later the same year, the prison would officially open its gates to an inmate population of 251 prisoners. As it's documented, the pen's early years were its golden era. At first, inmates were given jobs that would contribute to the prison as a nearly self-sufficient correctional community of sorts. And at its height, the site would boast a carpentry shop, a paint shop, a wagon shop, a stone production yard, a brickyard, a blacksmith, a bakery, a tailor, and a rather advanced infirmary. Notably, through the turn of the 20th century, life at the prison was described as good, and the prisoners were treated well and taken care of. Eventually, focus was lifted from work pursuits and instead the facility began educating its inmates, requiring that they attend class and advance their collective knowledge as a form of correction. Unfortunately, however, as the years droned on and the prison's populace increased, through the early 1900s, conditions within would start to wane. In the shadow of understaffing, violence amongst prisoners would run rampant, and shockingly, the site would rank amongst the US DOJ's list of top 10 most violent correctional institutions. During this same era, various gangs would essentially take over parts of the prison, and would utilize the basement as a getaway. For those who were connected and who could escape to this getaway, within were prisoner-run gambling rings, drinking, drugs, and pretty much anything a criminal might need to help pass their sentence. And one particular room, which was nicknamed the Sugar Shack, was said to be an epicenter for some of the pen's most atrocious acts. In 1929, the state decided to double the pen's layout. However, the cells were too small to fit the 3 prisoners they were designed to, and this resulted in 2 prisoners in each cell sleeping on a bunk, while a third was forced to sleep on a mattress on the floor, until another expansion could be completed in 1959. Now, on some darker side notes, from 1899 through 1959, a total of 94 men were executed by way of hanging and electric chair, right on site. In 1979, 15 prisoners would escape during a prison break, and one of said prisoners, being Ronald Williams, who was already serving life for the murder of a police officer, would be recognized by off-duty state trooper Philip Kessner, and would end up pulling him from his vehicle and shooting and killing him. Eventually, Williams was apprehended and was returned to the prison to serve out the rest of his days. Later, in 1986, the pen's most brutal riot would transpire when a group of 20 prisoners who called themselves Avengers stormed the mess hall and overpowered all officers present, holding them hostage and demanding better conditions. This incident would garner national attention, and while over the course of negotiations 3 inmates were killed by those trying to maintain the riot, no law enforcement was harmed, and under the pressure of news agencies and the American populace, staff ended up striking a deal that altered a number of the prison's inhumane conditions. Following the construction of newer facilities elsewhere, the old West Virginia pen's populace would begin to plummet rapidly through the early 1990s, until finally it was forced to close its doors, after which the site was acquired by the Moundsville Economic Development Council, who quickly repurposed it as a training stage for law enforcement for mock riot drills. And today, the campus offers a range of events from tours to paranormal investigations to escape rooms, murder mysteries, and more. Chillingly, nearly every portion of this old prison is believed to harbor some form of supernatural activity, and those who have both toured and worked within have reported instances of cell doors opening and closing on their own, disembodied footsteps heard on empty walkways, and shadowy figures that lurk in the darker parts of the building. One of the most haunted places at the prison is purported to be that of the infamous Sugar Shack, where God knows how many men lost their lives. And those who have neared this space have reported hushed, disembodied voices heard in seeming argument, extreme cold spots, and odd lights or illuminations spied through what should be total darkness. Possibly the most famous tale surrounding the Sugar Shack, and the whole of the basement for that matter, has to do with a former maintenance man who it's claimed spied on inmates during the prison's roughest times, and who, after ratting them out to the warden, was stabbed to death with shivs while using the restroom. The spirit of this former worker has been sighted roaming the halls silently with a sad look upon his face, and he's often observed covered in gruesomely deep stab wounds. Another local hotspot is the prison's North Hall, where criminals who continued their violent streaks within the walls of the pen were sent for a 23-hour lockdown, and where 2 documented murders, being those of a biker named Danny who was stabbed in the eye, and of one William Red Snyder who was fatally stabbed 37 times in front of his cell, transpired. Within this space, many have told of strange happenings, including equipment malfunctions, odd anomalies caught in photography, and objects observed moving around on their own. And near Red Snyder's former cell, many describe feeling immediately uncomfortable, as if they're in danger, or as if they're being stared at menacingly by someone unseen, who's trying to intimidate them. Lastly, in the mess hall where the aforementioned riot took place, the spirits of all 3 inmates who were killed supposedly still linger, and those who have spent time in the area have told of the clatter of feet and the commotion of a fight, sounds that emanate from thin air, and usually right around 5:30 in the afternoon, which is the exact time of day that all of this chaos started so many years ago. Thanks for joining me on this journey through some of the most haunted places in West Virginia. If you enjoyed hearing my histories and ghost stories, subscribe to my channel, throw this upload a like, and share me with anyone you feel could use a good scare. I'll see you all next time.